Hello and welcome to Don't Panic Yet. I'm Simon Monsour, and my guest for this episode is Sven Arnold. Sven is a cytogeneticist, a scholar of evolutionary biology, physics, and just about everything. He is, and I had to look these words up just to make sure I got them right, he is the living definition of an autodidactic philomath. We recorded nearly 4 hours of me throwing questions at Sven on a vast array of subjects, including the role of science, economics, free will, GMOs, and yes, psychedelics. His responses were wonderfully expansive, often unique, and always interesting. So here is a collection of highlights from our conversation, which has become episode 0, featuring Sven Arnold. I think for this one, we're just going to jump around, for better or for worse. Does that sound okay to you?
Yes, that is exactly what I would prefer to do, just because I tend to be listening about something and then I'll just drift off in a JD from Scrubs type manner and just start thinking about something else entirely, usually not in the same subject field at all. Then yes, it's probably much better for my thought process at the very least.
You are a scientist.
Well, yeah.
Yes, technically you're a cytogeneticist.
Technically, I like that. Technically, I am a scientist.
Yes. But you are so much more, is what I meant.
Okay, let's go with that. It's strange. No scientist ever calls himself a scientist. Very few scientists actually think of themselves as scientists at all. I don't know why. It's almost like thinking scientifically is, first of all, it's not a prerequisite to be a scientist, capital S, or small s, depending on how you want to think about it. But yeah, it's strange. Like calling myself a scientist just sounds strange because I would never describe that to myself. Like if another person that I knew to be in the science field somewhere asked me what I do, I would give them a quick description of what I do and they would simply assume that I was a scientist. But, to say to another scientist, I'm a scientist, that just sounds weird.
Yeah, because you are. You work in a lab. You wear protective clothing a lot of the time.
I wonder if it's almost it's almost like if you ask somebody, are they an adult? And they would say, yes, I'm an adult. But I think most people have this weird feeling that they're not quite adults yet, that there's other grown-up people doing the adulting of the world, but they're basically just still a child who's running around after butterflies and stuff like that. At least that's the impression I get from what other people say in memes, etc. But yeah, no, it's almost like you don't want to call yourself a scientist because that would imply that you should be earning a Nobel Prize at some point, or you should be heading up a lab that's just got a huge new grant or something like that. But anyway, the first tangent, sorry.
I think we need to work on your self-esteem. You are a scientist. You don't need
this
a Nobel
is
Prize.
Not just me. I know many other scientists, and none of them have ever called themselves a scientist.
I've done a lot of research on you, actually, and the way you think. And
that's not creepy
at all.
And
a lot of things. I've done that by actually talking to you in person.
Oh, good.
So you always have a lot of things on your mind. What has been on your mind lately?
The way I think about things has changed a little bit. I mean, I suppose in the way that sort of most people mature, you kind of start off with a fairly simplistic view of the world, and then you think of ways that it should be fixed, and then you sort of start wondering why it doesn't get fixed in exactly those ways, and then you at some point realize that it isn't going to get fixed, especially not in those ways, and you just give up and become an ordinary shopper. But I have tried to think about why things work and don't work. That sort of led me into economics as well, because I started to realize that economics really plays a much bigger role in the way the world works than most people like to admit, especially those who are trying to change it for the better. So, the number of people who think we should just over to socialism is alarming, especially when they don't really understand economics in the first place and they just want to switch over to socialism. It just seems it seems naive in the extreme. So yeah.
Well, just on that one, do you have a clear definition of what socialism is? Because to my mind, socialism is more about restricting the sort of chaos rather than being a system in itself with clear definitions from the ground up. Is that right, or am I missing something here?
Oh, I have no idea. I never worry about the strict definitions of anything because everybody has different definitions, and even if you manage to speak to somebody about socialism, they'll have a different idea about what socialism is supposed to be. So I do not have my own definition of what I think socialism is and what communism is and any of that. I don't think that it's important. Because they're just merely labels that you would eventually ascribe to a very complex system of rules, laws, markets, whatever mix it is. It's going to be a very complicated mix, and there's going to be about 1 million little parameters that can be adjusted in one way or another, from the biggest thing to the smallest thing, and no particular mix is going to be able to stick to one label. I think you would actually be much better off going back and discussing what is a free market before you even talk about. And people don't even know what the hell a free market is most of the time. So what's the point of discussing your definition of socialism if you don't even understand what a free market is? And you can just take that down from there to the point where you're discussing what is money, what is value, what is I don't know. I don't have any specific definition of socialism, right. But you can identify what's generally heading in a socialist trend.
So when you say socialism, do you sort of have a particular leaning? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good thing, to keep it very simple. But then in saying that socialism is good, I would never have abandoned the market system. I don't think there's any real evidence that there's any competing system that can set prices, etc., and address demand like the market system can.
I think there's something fundamentally valuable about a free market to do with innovation. The real argument is, do we have a free market at the moment? And what level is it free?
Yeah, well.
And of course, I would argue very strongly that we don't.
It's the old chestnut of the market being the least worst system we've tried so far.
Well, I like to think of the market using the analogy of sport, say football. You have a football league.
Which football?
I know football.
American
any football,
Australian.
Any football. It has a lot of very strict rules. Everyone knows exactly what they're fighting for and the rules they're fighting within. And it makes the competition vibrant and fair, and I would argue incredibly innovative. So what we have at the moment in a lot of the industries around the world is a situation where the rules are constantly in play, not the competition itself.
Yeah.
So I think there's lots that can be done there. But within strong rules and limiting externalities, negative externalities.
Negative externalities is one of the things that the market does not account for particularly well. But that was what I mean. But the market is the least worst system to set prices. Blah blah blah. That's because it doesn't address any negative externalities that we haven't built into the system, or that aren't open to being addressed by just human nature. So you've heard that you shouldn't buy a certain brand of tuna, so you don't buy that brand of tuna because they hack the heads off any dolphins they happen to. So the market can address some negative externalities, but I would say nowhere near enough, and certainly not with any fairness to the developing world or the future of everything. Anyway, that would be one of my objections to the market, even though I think we need to stick to the market.
Okay, so we've touched on economics. One of the other E words that keeps popping up in so many of our conversations is evolution.
Oh, damn it. I was thinking either environment or emotion.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll get there.
They're pretty good too.
Yeah.
I should just call this podcast E. Evolution by natural selection, I know that's something that you find very interesting. And my brain often goes to the notion of evolution when I'm thinking about most topics these days. I know it's going to come up in many topics in the future.
Well, I can go back to the original question. What have I been thinking about lately?
What have you been thinking about in terms of evolution?
Oh, no, that's not what I was thinking.
Okay.
That's not what I was thinking.
Okay, so what else have you been thinking about?
Now, I am thinking about evolution. Why did dogs start hanging around?
See, we're right.
Why did we start singing?
Everything comes back to evolution all the time. Something that is becoming a huge part of all our lives very rapidly, and that is the topic of artificial intelligence. When you think about the growing field of artificial intelligence, do you have a leaning towards being very optimistic or pessimistic?
Not enough information.
What's your heart tell you?
Optimistic, but I think there's going to be a painful teething period, I think. Much like we're going through with social media. When you're talking about human knowledge, there is a modern idea that to be respected in your opinion, you're meant to have an understanding or at least a confidence in the facts yourself, which I don't think is natural. I think it would be more natural to say, listen, I don't know a damn thing about AI, but my friend Simon, who is a trustworthy bloke and has never steered me wrong, apart from, I don't know, his opinion on food is ridiculous. But anyway.
And getting you to appear on such a dodgy, unstable production such as this podcast.
Worthy of me. But apart from that, he's never led me wrong, and he knows a lot more about AI than I do, and I just trust his opinion. Therefore, he thinks such and such about AI, and therefore I think such and such about AI. I have no proof of this. I don't want any proof. I trust Simon, and that's what he thinks. End of story. I think that's sort of how, and, you know, just...
Yeah, and any information that I have has followed the same path, to the point where you have that level of people that are actually on the ground going, right, does this work? Let's run some experiments and find out. There's a kind of a trust that there is that level somewhere of someone actually doing the experimenting.
So what do you think about that system of knowledge? I'm sure it could possibly be a bad thing. It could possibly actually play right into the whole factional polarization.
Yeah, I think the trick is really to hold those sort of ideas and those thoughts fairly lightly in proportion to the weight of the evidence that makes sense to you and the reputation of the source from which you've received the evidence. And you constantly have to be doing this. And of course, the thing you have to be aware of are your own biases that are affecting your actual rational assessment of whether something is right or wrong, or the way it is or the way it isn't. I don't know about you, but I find myself attaching emotionally to certain ideas or thoughts or sides of arguments.
Yes.
And having to go, hang on, do I really... Should I really be believing this?
Or is it just because I'm a closet communist?
Yeah, exactly. I suspect that it wouldn't be so great if there was too much of that. What I mean is that you don't want every single human on the planet trying to make a purely rational decision about everything that they have to deal with every moment of the day.
No.
In fact, you don't even want it to be a major part. It needs to be a very small amount. And so the scientific process, and really rational thought only has a use in the edge cases that you're suddenly dealing with. Things that no longer fit into one of the easy categories that you normally put things.
Yes.
Most of life doesn't require a very scientific approach. In fact, scientific approach will usually get in the way of most everyday actions and decisions that people have to make.
So this is why I think the need a phrase for it, knowledge by proxy. Like, you don't know anything, but you know other people who know stuff and you trust them. Like, if you're just considering what plants are good to eat, you don't want two people testing whether wild passion fruit vine is good to eat or not, because there's no point unless you doubt one of them. unless you doubt the results of one of them or something like that. There's going to be a whole bunch of overlap. Making a useful difference. Why didn't that work? It's good, sorry. You shouldn't have given me these things. They're bloody awesome. I am going to... Ooh, now I want to make a double helix.
Automation. Huge unemployment problems or utopian existence for all of us living on the beach while machines make everything for us.
So I feel that it's not going to be a huge problem, but if I was to logically follow what I think is going to happen, it seems like it suddenly does seem like it is going to replace a lot of human employment, and we are going to end up with 80% unemployment, and we're going to have to make some serious economic decisions at that point.
Yeah, and every industry is changing at a slightly different pace at the moment. But there are two arguments. One is looking at history and going the invention of new technology has not led to less people working, although the argument against that is the rate of change of technology is unprecedented. So we shall see.
The fact that there is a likely end point. Like at some point there is going to be nothing left.
What? There's going to be...
At some point AI is going to be able to do
So
everything.
I heard a full stop after that and I just thought, wow, there's going to be nothing left. Well, one of my topics was quantum cosmology and the many worlds theory.
Oh, okay.
What do you think? Have they got it right?
Do you judge these things on whether they just seem to intuitively feel right to you, or do you wait until you have more knowledge with which to judge? Many worlds makes perfect sense to me, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be the exact way. I think I would even say that it's way worse than most people think that whenever they make a decision, like whether they decide to have cornflakes or avocado on toast for breakfast, that represents a splitting of the universe into two different universes. I don't think that would split the universe because I don't believe in free will. However, I don't see any problem with the universe splitting not only into two, but into an infinite number of new universes with every quantum event. And every event is a quantum event. Every time an electron emits a photon because it's warmer than 0 degrees Kelvin, which is always, that is a quantum event that has an infinite number of outcomes, and each of those will be represented in the multi-world theory, and I don't have a problem with that.
I'm going to go with your answer as well, because every time I start studying the many worlds theory and quantum mechanics in general, my head just spins.
Yeah, see, I don't, and am never going to have enough concrete knowledge of it to be able to say one way or the other. But I have a feeling.
Well, sticking with the feelings thing.
Yep.
Do you feel there is intelligent life on other planets in the universe? And if so, and if they are nearby, why haven't they contacted us?
I don't care.
Next question.
It might be interesting, but I don't care. We've got more things to worry about, haven't we?
Yeah. Okay. Do we have free will?
No.
Next question.
Ridiculous suggestion.
Hang on. Well, I believe that we do have free will.
Really?
So we can discuss this.
I've never actually
another time.
gleaned that before.
Of course we have free will.
Yeah, see, the time that you said that, I think we sort of got into defining what we meant about free will, and I violently disagreed with your definition of free will.
Well, in summary, without getting
yes, I was about to say
without getting into it too deep right now, I think you can answer the question depending. It depends on whether you think freedom is a scientifically measurable state or is an experience. And if you think freedom is an experience, if you define freedom as an experience, a subjective experience, then yes, of course we have free will.
Okay.
But if you define it otherwise, then it's pretty unlikely we have anything remotely like free will.
I'm happy to go with that.
Excellent. Geopolitics. Are we going to destroy ourselves militarily before Christmas.
Oh, no.
A Christmas.
Yes.
Yes. Do you think we're doomed in that way? This leading into my next question is, I didn't give you a chance to answer, but I don't care.
Nice.
If you had to pick the most imminent threat to the quality of life of most people around the planet, what would you put as the number one priority?
That's difficult. I think the most imminent threat to human well-being is the idea that human well-being is not as good as it should be. The number of people I meet who are, I'm not going to say miserable, but really should be a hell of a lot happier with the wonderful life that people generally live in developed countries. And I think it's getting worse. And I think America is a great demonstration of what can go wrong when people think they're being wronged. And so I know I think it's a kind of weak answer, but I do actually think it is probably the most technically true answer, and that in the next 20 years, I think a lot of large developed nations and a lot of large developing nations are going to be convinced by their politicians that their life should be better if only we kicked out immigrants or we did such and such. And I think the side effect of that is a lot of people are going to be convinced that their lives aren't as good as they should be, and they are going to palpably be enjoying them a lot less. Now, I realize that's not the answer you wanted.
The correct answer is nuclear-armed robots on asteroids.
Infested with insecticide-resistant bed bugs. I'm not sure I answered that to my satisfaction. I think my answer was the correct one, but it's no fun.
You're right, but you're basically pointing out elements of human nature that have always caused problems.
Yeah.
And perhaps always will.
Yes.
Do you have any brief thoughts about the future of genetic engineering in the way it affects human activity?
I think at some point genetic engineering is going to be ubiquitous. And up until this point, people have gone about it, the big companies have gone about it in completely the wrong way. What they should have been doing is, instead of genetically modifying corn, they should have genetically modified houseplants so that they glow blue in the middle of the night. And stupid shit that people will happily buy on eBay because they think it's cool. Once they have done that, they'll be put in a position of cognitive dissonance, and they will have to accept GMOs as a part of life because they've already bought one because it was cool. At some point, people are going to realize this. And at some point, we are going to have far more power when it comes to genetic modification. I was just reading this morning about someone created a line of mice that had a particular genetic disease, doesn't matter what, and then they simply loaded up a virus, a simple cold virus, with the mechanism that corrected that gene that's present, the corrupted gene, the mutant gene that's present in every cell in that mouse's body. They put the mechanism for correcting it in a virus, gave the mouse the virus, and it fixed 20 to 60% of the mutations within that mouse. Sorry, person comes a bit later, but they've shown it for human fibroblasts as well. So it does work in humans. Now, up to this point, they'd shown it works very well for single cell cultures, maybe yeast, bacteria, blah, blah, blah. Plants, not too bad. Once you get into mammals, it's a bit more difficult. But 20 to 60% of all cells fixed, big news. At some point, that's going to be 100% or near enough to, at which point you will technically be able to change your DNA, and not just parts of your DNA, but all of your DNA. You will be able to change how your children turn out. You're changing your germline DNA, and that's not too far away. So these things are going to be infinitely popular long before legislation has the power to stop them. At the moment, it's easy to resist them because, we can go and protest against GM soy. We don't really produce that much of it ourselves to the point that our economy depends on it. So there is a massive public backlash against GMOs. But at some point that will disappear because people will learn to embrace it. I don't know whether that's necessarily a good thing because it's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for evil or good. And it's going to be the big corps that do that. And they're not necessarily evil. They're just big businesses. So we can assume that they're going to be at least mildly evil.
What do you think about psychedelics?
Don't know. Can you get some? Microdosing LSD or some shrooms. The one thing I know about psychedelics is I have spent quite a lot of time on small organic farms in Europe, spending time with people who were on psychedelics. Everybody who is on psychedelics thinks they are wonderfully inventive. They are not. They are annoying. That's all I'd like to say about that.
So what do you think about being on a podcast? That's not on the card, by the way. I just made that one up. It's on the spot. Creativity, man.
Frankly,
actually, creativity is written there. See? Creativity.
What do I think about creativity? It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as creativity. Same as free will.
Wow, that's such a creative answer.
Frankly, I kind of forgot that we were here. No, I
think that's good.
At some point, I kind of forgot that we were meant to be being listened to by a future audience. See, this is where I think the podcast will end up. I think you'll farm this whole studio out to a porch on an old Queenslander. Moths hovering around the light. Evening on the rocking chairs, both sort of looking off into the sunset distance, just discussing ideas and stuff. And that'll be it. It'll basically just be watching two or more old people reflecting on stuff that they've learned. That's where I think this is going to end up. On an old porch.
Well, let me ask this. If you can articulate a sense of purpose or direction for yourself, like some kind of meaning for yourself, how would you do that?
I would prescribe several more years of thinking about it with the hope of coming up with a good idea, because I haven't had one yet. I've had plenty of ideas. I've even tried a few of them out. I live a fairly, frugal existence. I try to do all of the environmentally friendly things, etc. And I try to give off that impression to the people that I work with and my friends. And I haven't yet had an idea that I really think is worth following up, short of, as I was mentioning before, finding someone that is doing palpable good in the world and giving them as much money as I can afford.
But is that your purpose then, to keep trying?
Yes. Right. Because that is trying to think of a greater purpose for myself is more fulfilling than actually giving thousands of dollars to somebody who is doing something worthwhile. Because that's the way, human vanity works.
Yeah.
So, I've given large sums of money to philanthropic and other charitable organizations before and felt nothing. But, I pick up a piece of garbage on the street and put it in the bin and someone thanks me for it and I feel really good, even though the two things aren't even comparable in terms of significance. But, yeah.
Yes,
so
we really are animals responding to external impressions and approval and stuff in that way. I love that. That's the idea of that constant search for the way to contribute. To contribute to what? For you?
Well, to bring it down to absolute basic metrics to improve the overall pleasurable experience of all conscious beings that are alive now and all conscious beings that will be alive in the future that have anything to do with this planet.
Well, having known you for a while and talked to you and a lot today, I know that the breadth of your knowledge and your interest in so many subjects is only going to serve that purpose well. And long may it continue.
Thank you.
Thanks for talking.
Anytime.
Yeah, this is a bad idea.
Munch, munch, munch.
Sorry.
The acoustics of podcast production, I think some people really need to think more about what sounds good.
I think there's a gap in the market for podcasts. Podcasts where people both choke and chew their food into the microphones.